Hey folks, thanks for joining us today. We will get started here with the Wildfire Resiliency Cohort, session 2 in just a second. I want to make sure the waiting room slows for a bit. Make sure everyone's in. Hope everyone's having a great day. All right. Looks like the waiting room is slowed, so I'll keep an eye on that. But we'll get started just in the interest of time. Thanks for everyone for joining us again for the NASEO and NARUC Wildfire Resiliency Cohort Session 2. This session is going to be all about getting to know your partner, so have an exciting lineup for you all today, and hopefully some good discussion to be had. Beyond that, first wanted to thank our sponsors at the Department of Energy Office of Electricity for their continued support of this effort and many efforts, and of course with the state energy offices and public utility commissioners in the room, as well as our other great colleagues, as well as NARUC for their continued support of this and several other efforts. As I mentioned, excited for the lineup that we have today. Have folks from the National Association of State Foresters, as well as folks from the Massachusetts Department of Natural Resources, to provide kind of on-the-ground experience as well as more of a national perspective on this topic. Going to be diving a little more deeper into kind of identifying some of those agencies that are involved in your state in wildfire preparedness, response, and recovery, as well as just kind of making those connections between the energy sector, you and the state energy offices and public utility commissions, and them and the state forestry folks. And obviously realizing there's some connecting points and coordination to be done there and opportunities. I'll also just add, we'll dive into a couple of housekeeping items before we dive into more of the meat of this conversation. Just to say, if you're joining us today, feel free to add to your Zoom name kind of where you're joining us from. I know I recognize some states and some names on here, but if you wouldn't mind just going over to your name and hitting the three dots and adding kind of what affiliation or state you might be from, that's just helpful for the other states in the room. Beyond that, feel free to join us on camera, utilize the chat. You guys know the deal with this. We're going to have some discrete presentations up front from Mark and Dave, and then kind of going to dive into some discussion format and have kind of a Q&A style panel discussion with, again, Mark and Dave. Beyond that, as you can see, this presentation is being recorded. We're only going to record kind of the presentation and upfront discussion portions of this and leave the back end and stop the recording to have a more open discussion after that. We can move on to the next slide. Thank you, Amanda, for sharing a little bit where you're from. For those that may have missed my spiel last time and are new to this group, what these cohorts are all about, as I mentioned, this is a partnership with the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners. Many of you know Hylia and Jody and Lynn and team over there. So for their continued help, and again, an effort supported by the Office of Electricity at the U.S. Department of Energy. As far as audience, it's broad stroke, but obviously our more primary audience is the state energy offices and public utility commissioners in the room, but also realizing that emergency management agency staff and others in the forestry and environmental agencies are really critical partners, especially in this space. Beyond that, I know many of you are familiar with NARUC's Wildfire Workbook. Great resource, great introductory resource. If you haven't taken a look, would encourage you to do so. I'm sure Jody and team might throw that in the chat. That'd be great. But kind of builds on that effort as well as NASEO's own Wildfire Forum webinar series. So this cohort is really focused on presentations from subject matter experts, and states alike, but really focused on some more action-oriented discussion amongst your state colleagues. So creating a space for that. And I've mentioned this, but this is our second cohort. We're going to have 4 total. So we're always open to new ideas about where we want to take this group and which topics we want to focus our time and discussion on. We'll go to the next slide. And just a quick overview. I'm not going to read through all of these words because there's a lot of words on here, but just looking to build at a high level, just community of practice amongst state energy offices and public utility commissioners. I know many of you are newish to this space, or some might have be very familiar with wildfires and the topic generally. So creating a space for that and kind of understanding those new emerging roles as we're seeing across the United States. Beyond that, just kind of build an educational basis. There's a couple items on here that we've heard from you all that are big priorities, whether it's PSPS or kind of knowing your neighbors. So making sure we're having discrete conversations as such. And I will go on to the next slide. And as I mentioned last time, if you recall, and I sent it in my follow-up email to this group, but this is an idea that we had from a previous cyber physical working group that we did, but essentially just some previous like check-in and homework. It's really meant to be a baseline for you all to see kind of what you've done between, cohort 1 and cohort 2, and then subsequent cohort just in between that time. So we had a to-do for you all to maybe we provided you a couple action items to do, hopefully nothing too complicated or time consuming, but just some specific call outs for you to think about in between sessions. They're on the screen here for you all, but hoping to kind of hear from you on if you were able to tackle any of these things. Again, just trying to build a community practice and kind of share amongst state colleagues here. So I'll pause there if there's any brave souls that want to share out.
This is Sam Benson with the Minnesota Department of Commerce. I can
Hey, Sam.
share briefly. Come off camera.
Thanks.
Yeah, we actually, fortuitous timing, had our first Public Utilities Commission hearing on this topic shortly after our last meeting, and got to hear from PNL and a number of utilities on their wildfire mitigation plans. So that was really informative, educational, and I think helped us get a better understanding where utilities at. Very varied kind of timelines of where they're at. Then we also have had some tabletop exercises, including one there's more wildfire focused day after that hearing. So it's been good. We're continuing to engage, continuing to grow our skills, and yeah, looking to continue that engagement going forward.
Thanks for that, Sam. Appreciate you sharing.
I'll add on with Sam.
Please.
So after our last call, also, we've had two fairly big fires in Minnesota that actually were both in my region, which is the northeast corner of the state. And I saw a lot of good cooperation between the locals and the power companies. One was a co-op for sure. Assessing the damage and making sure that they could get out there and get power back up and running as soon as they could to the residents. And it was just really neat to see both sides working really well together. I think one fire was 1,300 acres, another one was 350 acres.
Wow. Talk about timely. How, George, if you don't mind me asking, how was, it sounds like it was right in your backyard. Hopefully everything's good on your end, but how was your agency maybe involved or coordinated, or were you just kind of read into the situation? Just curious.
So my primary role as a regional program coordinator is I'm the liaison between the local emergency manager and the state emergency management office. So I get pulled into all of the disasters in my region, and so I was there just whatever the local emergency manager needed, I picked it up, and then we were able to set them up for success on the recovery end, and we have our preliminary damage assessment for a potential state disaster declaration next week with both of the counties. So yeah, I'm just that liaison between the local and the state.
All right. Thanks for sharing a bit about that. I know when I was thinking about kind of between last cohort meeting and this cohort meeting in regards to the first item, locating your state energy security plan and your state hazard mitigation plan. NASEO hosted our severe summer weather energy outlook yesterday, I guess it was, and just had a lot of good information on commodities, but mostly about weather and drought and things of that. So it kind of had me and Campbell thinking, potentially taking some of those resources and looking where it might fit in your state energy security plan, whether it's the risk profile or things of that sort. So just some things to think about. Sam, George, appreciate you being some of the brave souls and sharing out. I'll pause if there's anyone else. All right. Well, in the interest of time, we'll move on. Thanks for humoring me on that one. And we'll continue. We'd like to have just something for you guys to chew on and think of. So we'll have some session 2 things for you all to think on at the end of this. But we will move right along and pull down these slides and introduce our speakers for today, which is going to be Mark, who's Vice President of Fire Programs at the National Association of State Foresters, We're going to hear from Mark, and then we're also going to hear from Dave. As I mentioned, we're going to hold kind of questions towards the end of that, and kind of have a more panel Q&A style. Mark's going to have some slides here, and I think Dave's just going to jump in with his nuances. So look forward to your presentation. For folks that don't know Mark, he has a illustrious career. Comes from the state of Oklahoma and has been previous to his time in the National Association of State Foresters. Spent many years in the Oklahoma Forestry Service. So kind of give us that national perspective, but certainly has that ground level perspective as well. So Mark, I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Really looking forward to addressing the group and talking about favorite subject of mine and Dave's both, and that's wildfire. And really excited to be able to tie in with this group because there is such an overlap in what we do. And as the gentleman from Minnesota mentioned earlier, there is quite the interaction and overlap of state forestry agencies and the energy offices. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get into the presentation. So get right here and get started off. Mentioned Mark Goler, the Vice President of Fire Programs with the NASF. And I'm going to go through a couple of these fairly quickly so that we can get right into the meat of the presentation. As long as I can make it work. All right, so I'm going to have to stop and restart this because it's not advancing. Okay, let's give this a try. Okay, there we go. All right. So what are state forestry agencies, our responsibilities? And I'm not going to read all of these. I'm just going to really go into what we actually do and in regards to wildfire. But the state agencies of the United States provide for wildfire protection on 1.1 billion acres of the U.S. And that includes some of the most complex firefighting environment there is, and that's the wildland-urban interface. And as you are painfully aware, that is where we have a lot of our energy infrastructure and how wildfire can impact that and how we often see each other in some of the worst situations. And what NASF does, NASF, and I'm just going to go to the bold at the bottom of the page. NASF is a primary member of the National Wildfire Coordinating Group and the National Multi-Agency Coordinating Group. Now, for those that aren't aware, the National Wildfire Coordinating Group, it consists of the U.S. Forest Service, the U.S. Fire Administration, the U.S. Wildland Fire Service, and NASF. And then there's a number of other agencies that are technical support and so on with NWCG. But NWCG is a standards setting group. They don't make policy, but they have standards for interoperability between the agencies that respond to wildfire. And that makes it easy for one state or one agency when it comes to ordering resources. When we order, for example, a Type 6 engine, which a lot of states, a lot of the media will call them brush pumpers or grass rigs or, firefighting engines. When we order a Type 6 engine from Massachusetts and it's going to go to the state of Colorado, we know that what shows up will be the same thing that we order and that what we need. And so the NWCG does that for equipment, personnel, for qualifications. And again, everybody agrees this is our minimum standards, and we know when we order something, that's what we're going to get. NMAC, or the National Multi-Agency Coordinating Group, is the body of, again, NASF, U.S. Fire Administration, U.S. Forest Service, and U.S. Wildland Fire Service. They set priorities for resource deployment when the country gets into especially preparedness level 4 and 5, which are preparedness level 5 is the highest preparedness level. And that means usually is when the fire situation is going on extreme in two or more geographic areas. There's a high competition for resources and the need for more to meet the emerging and existing fire situation in the country. And so NMAC is that body that prioritizes resources. They track what's available and move those resources around. So just as to give everybody an idea of where we sit, the fires that we have in fire trends, if we look at the annual numbers of fires nationally, it's the top left graphic. If you were a statistician, you would draw a straight line through that. So since 2015 through 2025, basically the fire numbers have been fairly static. And if you go back, if you drop right below that and look at the numbers from 1985 through 2024, in 1983 was when fire statistics really became more accurate and more consistent going with reporting. You can see that trending, trending straight across. But basically, the number of fires, the 5-year average, has really not changed since 1985 to date, to 2024. If you go to the next graphic, top right, the acres burned nationally, now that has substantially changed. In the last 10 years, you can see we've had a couple of off years, or at least four. 2023, 2.7 million acres burned nationally, but previous years we topped 10 million acres. And 2015, I believe, was the first year that we actually in the United States burned over 10 million acres in 1 year. Last year in 2025, only 5.1 million. But going down below that, you look at the 5-year average from back all the way back to 1985 to date, we're starting to see more of an exponential rise in the number of acres burned. So the threat from wildfire across the country has increased significantly and continues to do so. Now, near and dear to our heart here, wildfires caused by power generation, transmission, or distribution from 2021 to 2026. 12,535 fires. That's in that time frame, in that 4-year or 5-year period, that's only 4% of all wildfires reported. Why that number is significant is, generally speaking, when we have a fire started from power generation, a transmission line coming down, it's because of a high wind event, and that's typically the worst fire weather that we have. High winds, low relative humidities. The fires are very resistant to control. The spread rates can go from anywhere from 2 to 5 to 10 miles an hour. A fire in Oklahoma that burned in 2017 burned over 35 miles in the first 8 hours. And so the reason why this is, again, why it's so significant is because the fire weather is typically the worst when we have the power line fires. The slide you're looking at happens to be just outside of Santa Barbara, and that was the Gap Fire from 2008. And that fire impacted the Santa Barbara, that whole area, the California coast, because what you're looking at on the screen are the main transmission lines going into Santa Barbara and Southern California. And because of the smoke from the wildfire caused the lines to arc and short out and cut the power to those communities. What you're seeing also, if you look very closely, you can see the linemen out there, they're cleaning the insulators off of cleaning the oil from the chaparral off those insulators so that the lines can be turned back on. So what do state forestry agencies have in regards to wildfire protection actions? And realizing we're talking to a wildfire cohort, and interacting with your state forestry agencies is going to be key to preparedness actions and mitigating the hazards of wildfire. So hazard mitigation activities, the state forestry agencies are heavily involved in mitigating hazardous fuels, in particular in those areas where the highest risk from wildfire exists. And that can be anything from prescribed burning and mechanical fuels removal. In our preparedness actions, predictive services, we have some state agencies, a number have their own predictive services units and employees dedicated strictly to that, and that's at state level. But then also the National Weather Service offices have really come a long way in the last several years, since 2015 and before, in regard to prediction of severe fire weather and the potential for fire weather outbreaks. In particular, there's what started off as the Southern Great Plains Wildfire Outbreak Group. The National Weather Service has gone from where we would have one day of preparedness for an extreme weather event to now they're reliably predicting these extreme fire weather events 5 to 7 days out, which is absolutely incredible and so important for the state agencies to be able to be ready for that event when it occurs. In addition to the National Weather Service and some state that have the state level predictive services units, you've got the geographic area coordination centers. Atlanta, Georgia for Region 8, and then you've got the Southern California, Northern California. You've got the geographic area in Region 3, Albuquerque, and so on. So the U.S. Forest Service and the state agencies and now the U.S. Wildland Fire Service are the member agencies in those coordination centers. So those are also a resource for predictive services and being able to be prepared for the extreme weather events that impact wildfire and wildfire response. And then also the National Interagency Coordination Center in Boise, Idaho. They have a very robust predictive services unit, and there they predict not only and provide the daily fire weather outlooks, but also the monthly outlooks. And June 1st was they issued the latest that covers June, July, August, and September to show where the potential above normal fire activity will occur. And those are easily accessible by the public. Just get on the National Interagency Coordination Center or the National Interagency Fire Center. You'll be able to see that and pull those outlooks up. And then also on preparedness, not only with predictive services, looking at the weather and what could potentially happen in the days to come, but also the preparedness actions also go with the cooperating agencies and also our emergency support function partners for wildfire. Wildfire is ESF4, and on the national level, that responsibility is with the U.S. Forest Service. At the state level, it is primarily with the State Forestry Agency. And so when it comes to a potential disaster or when a disaster occurs and the state emergency operation plan is put into effect, then you would be interacting with your state forestry liaison at ESF4. Other things that we do for protection actions is public awareness. We have quite robust public information campaigns when we do see that there will be either an extended fire weather event, ongoing fire activity, and that not only goes for the public, but also for our cooperators and stakeholders, and also for specifically for the other fire response agencies to provide them with fire behavior information, fire safety, other things that might be pertinent for that daily operational period or for the event in totality. Finally, talking about other protection actions, the state agencies are heavy into resource prepositioning because of the predictive services abilities that we have now and the more advanced things that we have. We're able to pre-position resources closer to where we see the events are going to occur. And that can be anywhere from incident management teams, from overhead, like division supervisors, incident commanders, ICT4s, ICT5s, and so on. Crews, 20-person crews, modules of 10 folks that can go out and fight fires. Also, the hotshot crews, the Type 1 crews. Then also engines, we can pre-position those, and then also aircraft, and those we can move around to various airports close to where we see the event's going to occur, and also set up the infrastructure that they need for either fire retardant, for water, other firefighting chemicals that they can utilize to help suppress the fires. Other actions that we take and things that are in place. Detection. This has become very extremely important as we've lost a lot of the capability for fire towers, which I still have listed, but those are in a lot of areas of the country becoming fewer and fewer. But detection cameras have become a very important part of detection for the state forestry agencies. And a lot of those cameras now have AI on them and machine learning so that they can filter out when they either see a controlled burn, a prescribed burn, numerous things that typically will show up on a camera, and they can filter those out and say, hey, this is a smokestack over at a power plant that frequently shows steam, or something that they detect that might look like a fire, but they can filter that out. One great partnership, and many power companies, I think, have begun to get into this, but they are setting up the detection cameras for wildfire detection for their own protection, but also in partnership with the state forestry agency that has the wildfire response capability. Hawaii Power is a great example of a detection camera network that was set up after the Lahaina fire a few years ago. And they're able to share that with Hawaii Division of Forestry and Wildlife, and to be able to detect fires and see them when they're smaller, and to be able to get the resources moving in a more quick and efficient manner. As I mentioned, the towers are becoming fewer and fewer. We also have detection aircraft that are up in the air on those days when there's potential for wildfire. And then also a relatively new technology that really began in 2015, but has really become an important aspect of detection for the states, and that is the National Weather Service satellite hotspot notifications that are available nationwide. Those satellite detections have become so accurate that they can detect a fire as small as a vehicle, and usually within 100 yards accuracy of where that fire occurs. Many times those fires are detected before 911 is even called, and the detection notifications go to the state agency with a location, the nearest fire weather station, what the conditions are, and whether or not that fire is growing, and what it might look like for the state forestry agency that's responding. So that is a nationwide standard product from the National Weather Service now, and is available for emergency response agencies and state forestry and so on. Response, state forestry agencies utilize the closest available resource concept. And again, that pre-positioning that we put into place is so that we can respond quickly and get there to put the fire out as small and at the least impact as possible. And then we also closely coordinate with our local fire departments, the other state agencies, our state forestry compacts. Every state in the nation is a member of a state forestry compact. So when we see that the fire situation is escalating, or we're starting to run short on resources, we can call on our other state forestry agencies to supply us additional resources that they can bring into the state, and that can be overhead equipment, aircraft, personnel, and have those available to bolster the response capability of the state and local agencies. And then also the state forestry agencies have access to all the federal resources as well through our mutual aid agreement with the U.S. Forest Service. And that would include the same complement of resources, aircraft, overhead, incident management teams, engines, heavy equipment, whatever we need. And so the system that is in place in the country for firefighting response is second to none in the world, and very proud to be a part of that and to support that and have worked in that system for my career. And I'm sure Dave Salino from Massachusetts would say the same thing. Recovery, the state forestry agencies and some are also heavy into the burned area rehabilitation because of the after effects of a wildfire. And I won't go too far into that, but it does have some impact when it comes to working with the power companies and what they might need to do to reestablish that energy infrastructure to service the communities and the public. Now, I'm gonna back up just 1 second. I did mention incident management teams, and the gentleman from Minnesota that mentioned the fires there. And many times, especially when we get into a preparedness level 3 and above in the United States, preparedness 3, 4, and 5, the large fires, which are over 100 acres in the timber and over 300 acres in grass, those are considered large fires. And in many cases, those will be managed by an incident management team. The incident management team would be who you as a state energy officer or the power company would interact with the liaison officer on an incident management team to gain access into a fire area in order to assess the damage to the fire, the power infrastructure, and what might need to be reestablished in order to get that power up and running. And the incident management teams, they are the experts in regards to what that fire is doing, what the safety concerns, and how also to protect the responders from the energy companies to keep them from being impacted by the fire itself, and then also all of the post-fire effects that are there, the snags, the trees that have burned and fire weakened trees that could fall without notice during wind events and so on. And so incident management teams, if you're not familiar with those, it would behoove you to reach out to your state forestry agency also to talk to them about how incident management teams are ordered, how they're deployed, and also how to interact with them. So I'm going to go ahead, my next slide, and that I'm moving into the questions and answers. I will go ahead. That's my contact information. Please feel free to take that down and contact me at any time. We also have access to all the other chiefs, managers, and supervisors. Those are the state agency officials that deal with wildfire in each state. And I can get you in contact with those individuals if you don't already have that information. So I'll go ahead and stop there and stop sharing the screen and turn it back to Sarah for questions and answers from Dave and myself.
Yeah, thanks for that, Mark. I appreciate that. Well, first off, that slide in regards to, I think, gave state energy offices and public utility commissions a good, 500-foot view of the state forestry service, what kind of actions they're taking in regards to mitigation, preparedness, response, all the things. So that was certainly helpful to hear. Mark, I don't know if you saw in the chat, but I do want to draw your attention to our colleague from Oregon, Tracy, in a previous life used to work for the Oregon Department, or excuse me, Oregon Emergency Management Office, and she put in a picture from that fire that you mentioned during your presentation. So
Oh, awesome.
that's pretty neat.
Yeah, it is.
Well, great. Well, thanks for that. Dave, I don't know I know you don't have any slides on you, if you wanted to first add any additional color to Mark's presentation, and then happy to kind of dive into some Q&A and discussion format.
Will do, Sarah, and thanks, Mark. Mark did an excellent job of laying out that landscape of what it's like in our world as state fire programs. And what I thought I'd do, reading some of the language when Mark forwarded this invite to me, it sounded like there was some interest about what's going on in the Northeast, because we think traditionally, and we think when we think wildfire, we're always thinking about those Western states, and rightly so, because there's some big acreages that get tallied every year What we're finding in the Northeast, folks, is that we're seeing kind of a little bit of a return to our historical fire occurrence that was common back in the 1920s through the 1960s, right? And 2024 was sort of a hint for us, and we had multiple states that had large fires. Little state of Massachusetts, we had 4,000 acres burn in less than 35 days. And so that's a wake up call for a program in a small northeastern state, or almost any eastern state that isn't seeing this occurrence happen on a yearly basis, right? So that's how we look at 24, was just a hint that, oh yeah, that's right. 3 generations ago, we had 5,000, 10,000 acre fires in the Northeast, and oh boy, it can happen again, given the right conditions, like a long-term drought onset with winds and low humidities that happened to us in the fall of 24. And so we found that we were ready for it on a local basis, and here's why. And in New England, in particular, we're used to those strong partnerships, and we make those partnerships happen ahead of time. And so, state fire marshals' offices, state emergency management agencies, we work very close with those in most of our Northeast states. And then, of course, local, as Mark mentioned, the response is really local and state response, with even some federal assistance. Here in the Northeast, we're much more local and state centric because there's less federal lands. But when it comes to Fish and Wildlife Service lands, fair amount of refuge lands, and so those staff members and those resources are available to us, and it's actually all through that agreement in the authorities that Mark mentioned on how we share resources. Here's what's interesting for the audience, and even for some of my friends as I interact with fire managers in the Western states, is in a state like Massachusetts or New Hampshire, most of Maine, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New York, it's actually local jurisdiction that owns the incident. And so when we get a wildfire here in Massachusetts, and I even have to remind some of the fire chiefs when I speak at their organizations, that in Massachusetts by law, it's the local fire chief that owns responsibility for the fire response, even on state lands. And so a few years back, we had 63 new fire chiefs in our state, and there was an eye opener for them, because they thought if they had a wildland fire on their state forest land, that they could just sort of go out there, and once the state brush truck got there, they can walk away. That's not true. So that's part of our strategy, Sarah, as we train, is to make sure that everybody understands what their role is, and that's critical. And so coming out of 24 for us, we saw an uptick in interest in wildfire planning and mitigation preparedness. And we have two large utility companies in our area, National Grid and Eversource, who really got out in front of this and actually started looking at their wildfire mitigation plans. National Grid in particular actually came up with a training program. They reached out to us. We came on as SMEs to make sure that some of their messaging was meeting those standards that Mark talked about. So we made sure that there was a link to those national standards, and even in terminology, right? So that was good. And as a matter of fact, National Grid rolled out their training, and I've talked to a number of fire departments that participated, and they said it was really well done. Everybody got a lot out of it. So that was one of the benefits coming out of that 24 season. We saw an uptick in communities looking at community wildfire protection plans and development because, again, they were near misses. What's unique about the eastern states, especially up and down the Appalachian chain, is that the WUI, the wildland urban interface, is in higher percentage for us. So in most cases, what we might consider in the Northeast to be we might consider nationally to be a small fire. If it's a 50-acre fire in the northern hardwoods here, there's a good chance that it's going to have some sort of an impact downstream on some values at risk, human values at risk. And so the utility infrastructure is definitely going to be impacted in some form or fashion. And what came out of this training, out of the 2024 experience, was adding utilities and utilities adding the fire managers into their list of partnerships, right? And so we're talking to each other and realizing, I'm glad that Mark went back and talked about those incident management teams and utilities actually considering playing a role and having a connection to a liaison officer on an incident management team. That's critical. Here, we're not going to find necessarily complex incident management teams. That doesn't mean that the utility can't be involved, and that the ICs shouldn't be looking for somebody from the utility company to bring their expertise to the organization of the incident. So that was critical. The only thing, a uniqueness to the east, especially in the northern hardwoods here in the northeast corner of the country, is that wind events, actually play a huge role in that infrastructure causing a new fire start. For us, we're about 70% forested, right? And so it's forest type and it's vegetation and clearance along those utility right of ways. And that's what's impacting our infrastructure grid, our utility grids, and the cause of most of our power related fire starts. We run about anywhere from 4 to, well, Mark's right, on average, the national average about 4%. We're running about 5 to 9% of our wildfires are somehow utility related, and most of those are probably going to be from vegetation impact. So I wanted to kind of just give you that flavor. Mark mentioned the compacts, which is great. And then the training part is huge, and in those partnerships, we pride ourselves in making those happen. So a little bit from our little neck of the woods here in the northeast corner.